Thanks for tuning in to the Drive On podcast, where we're focused on giving hope and strength to the entire military community. Whether you're a veteran, active duty, guard, reserve, or a family member, this podcast will share inspirational stories and resources that are useful to you. I'm your host, Scott DeLucio, and now let's get on with the show. Hey everybody, today my guest is Roger Marsh. Roger is a bit of a unique guest for this podcast as he is an Australian Army veteran. I believe that's a first, having a non-US military veteran on the show, but we're all allies, and Roger served alongside with the Americans in Afghanistan, and since then he's struggled with his own battles with PTSD, and I wanted to have him on the show to emphasize that this isn't a uniquely American problem. This is something that affects soldiers from all over the world, all of our allies, and also Roger is an author, and we'll talk about how his writing has helped him in his journey along the way. So, welcome to the show, Roger. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much, Scott.
Yeah, I'm glad we were able to find a time to get together, given the fairly significant time difference between us. For the listeners, it's about 5 o'clock in the evening where I am, and it's around 10 o'clock in the morning the next day for Roger. To give you an idea of how much of a time difference there is between us right now, that's 17 hours or so time difference. But through the power of technology, it feels like I'm sitting right there in Australia with Roger. So this is pretty amazing. So anyway, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, cool. I served in the Australian Army for 13 years. So I was a regular Army. During most of that time, I actually served as a chaplain. So Australian Army chaplain is a little bit different to US Army in that we both qualify on weapons and have to maintain weapons currency. And we never got a chaplain's assistant. So in Afghanistan, I carried a rifle because it was the only way they could guarantee my safety. And with the green on blue threats that we were facing and going out to patrol bases and so forth, it was good. And it's also, I know snipers are curious creatures. So they like things that look different. And I never wanted to look different in a war zone because I think that's a bad plan.
Right.
Because if you're walking around with just a pistol or with nothing, we'd had warnings of a few Chechens getting about that were just like to shoot things out of curiosity. So it was I was glad to have that. Mm-hmm. The mental health problems that emerged for me were bizarrely, for some people, not primarily as a result of Afghanistan. So Australian Army chaplains, part of our role is identifying the fallen. So typically it's a regimental sergeant major, medical officer, and chaplain who have to agree. Now, obviously, sometimes positive ID is not possible. And so on. So we do some, you're there, you're part of it, and sometimes some fairly unsavory things get along the way. But the thing that really busted me mentally and which surprised me was when I got home from Afghanistan, I took about a week's leave, and then because the combat brigade I was part of were very short on chaplaincy resources, I was involved in a truckload of, we call them fatal cas, which is basically a death notice. And that played havoc with my mental health. It just completely wore me out, and I sort of spent the next year feeling really numb, and I didn't really know why. And it was bizarre because I'd sat with so many soldiers who I thought, no, you've got PTSD, let's link you in with whatever service you need to kind of either try and get this treated, because the commanding officer I had said, look, it's just like any other illness or injury, treat it well, treat it early, good to go. So I was in a cavalry regiment at the time, and there was a really good atmosphere about mental health stuff. There wasn't any great stigma in the regiment because, light armoured had been fighting a lot in Iraq and Afghan, so it was just an accepted reality. But it took me a long time to actually kind of come to terms with the fact that I had that until it really wasn't until I was posted to Darwin to a different unit. And I was the area on call as well as on call for my regiment. And I got asked to go out and speak to a lady who, she was a wife of a soldier, and she was apparently having some, I thought, postnatal depression. And I thought, I'll just triage this and I'll get her, because she rang the on-call chaplain number. So you're like, okay, I'll triage this and try and get better care in. Mm-hmm. When I arrived, she was in the middle of a full-blown psychosis. And she was actually a threat to herself and to her child. And so I picked up the child and just started saying, what a great mum you are. You're such a fantastic mum. Look, you got such a lovely, healthy baby. And she did. Mm-hmm. I wasn't lying. And then ticking away in the back of my mind, if this woman tries to harm the child, me, 6 foot tall, 200-pound male, is going to have to put the hurt on a 5'3", much smaller woman, and this is not going to play well in the news.
No, that will definitely look bad.
It's like, yeah, muscles. But by some happenstance, everything went really well. We got her into an acute psychiatric unit that specialised in sort of neonatal stuff. Her husband was brought back from the bush. It wasn't too far away, but it was in the middle of the bush of the Northern Territory, so it was still significant. Mm-hmm. And I came away from that thinking, okay, we kicked goals, we saved lives today, this is good. 2 days later, I was a blubbering mess. Wow. And my wife's going, what's the matter with you? And I said, I just don't know. And I went and spoke to our head chaplain, and I said, look, I don't think I'm doing very well. And he goes, yeah, I'm wondering when I was wondering when this was going to come up. What? Wow. I just wanted to strangle him. You knew? And I didn't. Why didn't you? And he said, look, I needed for you to wait, because he said there's, and then he listed off all the things that I had to do, whether it was identifying the dead or dealing with really nasty situations with families or dealing with lots of death. That was mm-hmm. the bottom line. He said, I knew there was going to be issues, but I didn't want to push it with you. And also one of the OCs, a major from my regiment, she actually virtually the same day said, Padre, and they often call us Padre, come for a brew, which sort of Australian slang for come out for coffee. And she just sat me down, and I'm like, oh, how you doing, ma'am? And how's things? I'm thinking we're going to talk about something to do with her subunit that she's in command of. And she just sat there kind of like, how long have you had PTSD? I'm like, oh, far out. You know? Why is everybody talking about this? But I started getting help, and it was a bit of a problem, because the psychologist, seeing that I had crosses on my collars, went, oh, what's it like to be on the other side of the desk? And I'm like, can I headbutt you? It's like, you jerk.
Right. Yeah.
That's just because somebody's in a helping profession doesn't mean they've got some sort of exemption ticket.
Right.
And she seemed to be taking some pleasure in the fact that I had mental issues. And so that didn't go too well.
Well, and the strange thing too is I know there's a lot of psychologists who have their own psychologist for, to kind of process the traumatic stuff that they have to deal with their own patients.
Yeah, and
they need to go and speak to a separate psychologist of their own. And so that's a bizarre response in my mind, anyways. That
I
person would
learned
have had.
later. So within our mental health support systems, we have a free counselling service for all soldiers and veterans that was actually started by Vietnam veterans.
Okay.
And the government got on board with it and sponsored it to a great degree. And they're not too bad. But in this particular location, they were having some issues. We're having some real problems with them. And like 4 weeks later, I was part of a brigade mental health forum, and the CO of one of the Armoured Corps regiments got the boss from this organisation, and by the time he was finished, the guy was blubbering and shaking. It's not often that an army CO will just try and destroy the personality of a civilian, but he did. And rightfully so, because they were not actually doing their job. Mm-hmm. So I think I just sort of struck what was unfortunately the case. But this began a journey, mental health-wise, that eventually led to me not being able to continue in Army.
Right.
Simply because I reached a point where every time I tried to push myself professionally or just mentally, not so much physically I was fine, I just get sick. And there's a great book about trauma and other things called The Body Keeps the Score, by a guy called Bessel van der Kolk. He's an American of Dutch abstraction. And these things will sort of find a way out in your system. It's kind of like, yeah, you can repress memory, you can do something, but it's going to do something to you somewhere in your system. And this got picked up by the medical staff where I was posted and said, look, you're getting sick every time you are on call, you're getting sick every time you push yourself. This is a problem. We can't continue. And so that began the process of me being medically discharged, simply because of the realisation that I couldn't keep going doing the job because my medical fitness was not sufficient. And that is my personal mental health journey through Army. And so I was medically discharged, and writing was emerging concurrent with this.
Okay.
I started writing for two reasons. One was to get the poison out of the system, because I'd always liked writing. And I thought, if I can, what it does is it makes you distill the essence of experience from the fog of war. Because when you go through a war zone, when you go through nasty, nasty events, it's like all this experience just crowds in on you, and you just don't have time to process it. You have to kick it somewhere and go, put that in the later pile, and I'll deal with it some other time. Mm-hmm. So, and that often has mental health effects just by itself. But right. The second part of it of me wanting to write was the realisation. It was particularly just after I came back from Afghanistan. There were little awkward moments, funny awkward moment. I hadn't been back a week, and I go to church. I'm drinking a can of Coke, and I don't know what the US is like, but generally within a lot of Australian churches, you at least have at least one resident health Nazi who wants to tell you that everything that you're doing is going to kill you. And here's me having just come back from a war zone where death is a problem.
Yeah. And
I'm drinking a can of Coke, and she just starts to lecture me about how this is going to kill me. And I just snapped. I went, "You will die." I'm thinking, "Ooh, that's possibly coming out like a death threat." And her husband's sort of like grabbing her and like, no, 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 you need to get away. But the thing that I realized is that, and through another couple of conversations when I was, again, it was another lunch after church. Was when I was posted to the Australian Army's equivalent of Paris Island. So basic training centre for soldiers. We just maintain the one.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody asked me, oh, what were you doing this week? And I said, oh, I was down at the high wire confidence course a lot because, there were some people having some struggles just overcoming the fear. And, oh, what do you, she asked me, why do you put people through a high wire confidence course? And I went, well, it's to familiarise them with the physical sensation of fear so that when they encounter it in a high stress situation like a battlefield,
mm-hmm.
then they know what it is and they're able to make decisions under pressure of fear. And she just looked at me and said, why would you want to do that to people? And I'm like, you really don't get this, do you?
Yeah, that seems like a typical, like a civilian response to this is, why would you be so mean and force them to do these scary things, or why would you yell at them and all these things, like you want them to experience the stress before the bullets are flying, and that's the stress,
and that's a far more existential stress.
Right. Yes, exactly.
I always thought, there's a culture gap. This made me realize there's a huge culture gap.
Mm-hmm.
We get thrown into the army, but I'd been in the military most of my working life, and it was second nature to me. I had a military father who was a Korean War veteran. I was a very later. He was quite old when I was born, relatively speaking.
Mm-hmm.
He was 41, and so military stuff was innate to me. I didn't really realize that, but it was innate. And I realized that after about 5 years in the military, the people I went to university or college with they did not understand me at all. And that was, it's a big part of the threat that we face in Australia, like social isolation after discharge. Is a big problem. And so from my deployment in Afghanistan, which was MTF-1, Mentoring Task Force 1, I wasn't there the whole time. I was part of what's called rocker relief push. So this was pushing people into theatre so critical staff could take leave. So the mid-deployment kind of break kind of thing that we did. And so I was just flying a bit all around the place with that. And I've just found that with that task force, if you talk to soldiers, they go, oh, far out, MTF-1, you guys got smacked. It was 2010, it was Afghanistan, it was very kinetic. But the sad fact of the matter is more guys from that deployment have died of suicide than we lost in combat.
Mm-hmm.
And so social isolation has in effect been, and other things attendant to it, have been more deadly than the Taliban. And so what I did with Echoes in the Wind is I tried to write a novel that would give people a window into what military life is like. And I set it at a fictitious basic training centre to give people an idea of what we have to do and why. And, so answering questions like another crazy church incident was like, why are you army people so aggressive? And I'm thinking, do I really want to give this person an honest answer? Yes, I'll go for an honest answer. And I said, because at its most visceral, we are training people to stick a piece of steel in another human being in order to kill them. That requires aggression. that ended that conversation fairly efficiently, but it was just,
which was probably the goal.
yeah. Well, it honestly was becoming my goal. I was like, please make this stop. But it wasn't just in church situations, social situations, and again, I just ended up feeling like this social hand grenade. And I wrote a poem to that effect of, a veteran becomes like a living ghost. You're like a living reminder of all these things that civilians don't want to think about.
Yeah.
About death, about suffering, about the fact that their gummy bears and unicorns view of the universe just is not real. And yeah, and that becomes another factor in it, is people don't want to talk to you because, and then when my son Jonathan got sick, so my youngest son died of brain cancer in March of last year. And as I was getting in the process of getting medically discharged from the army, he got diagnosed and started treatment. We got some good months with him over the sort of 14, 15 months that he had post-diagnosis. It was a very aggressive tumour, so a glioblastoma, which is very, very dangerous. And if he had survived, he would have been a world first. Wow. So to watch him die, that kind of, what that did is added another layer to the living ghost thing, where you're just, not only is he crazy PTSD person, he is also a parent who's lost a child. So there's a double reminder of things people didn't want to think about.
Well, right. And in that case, there are those people who have no military experience and haven't lost a child themselves, now have two things that they don't have in common with you to be able to, I don't want to say commiserate, but, to be able to, relate to your point of view and your perspective in life. Whereas had your son made a recovery and you not been a combat veteran or, gone, into the military at all, then, you would have a lot more in common with those people. But your experiences going on, throughout all of that has definitely shaped you in a different way. And I think your experiences with dealing with civilians, I think you said perhaps this is an Australian thing, but I definitely don't think that it is an Australian thing. I think this is a fairly universal thing. Obviously, I haven't spoken to people from all over Europe or other countries that we're allies with or whatever, but I can definitely tell here in the United States, that's a very common thing. I did a poll in a Facebook group for veterans a few months ago, and I wanted to see what is one of the most common things that you're struggling with after getting out of the military, or coming back from a deployment, or whatever the case may be. And the absolute number one thing that people responded with was dealing with civilians and relating to civilians, and basically any civilian interaction that they were having was just an absolute nightmare for them. Then add on top of that, the losing a child is, having three young children myself, and thankfully they're very healthy children. I can't begin to imagine what that's like. I could imagine it being absolute hell, and that's not from my own personal experience, it's just what I would imagine it being. But that has to be a trauma that just it doesn't go away, especially not now. It's only a little over a year later. That's something that is a very hard thing to deal with.
It was pretty ordinary. It was pretty awful. And at the time when he was, particularly when he was dying, we were fortunate to have in our circle of people two elderly Dutchmen who both lived through the Battle of Arnhem as children.
Okay.
So we were in a circle of people who had a pretty realistic outlook. But, as you mentioned, a sort of military civilian divide. I have a friend who's a German army veteran of Afghanistan, and they found it possibly even worse simply because of the conflicted history that Germans have with their military. Mm-hmm. They just kind of don't want to think about the military, period. Or a certain percentage of the German population don't. Whereas, he was quite, patriotic and quite a level, well-rounded sense, and wanted to serve his country. And he comes back and it's like, wow, the isolation's probably even worse for them. But Brit friends, similar. Mm-hmm. You are a different culture, and it's sometimes easier to relate to a soldier who doesn't even speak English as a first language. Than,
for sure, yes.
Yeah, than somebody who, and even linguistically, that it changed us as a family, the military. Mm-hmm. The good things that flowed out of, I think, war was, actually, as Jonathan was dying, I asked him, are you afraid? And we talked about matters of faith and so forth, which were quite important to him. Mm-hmm. But he said, look, Dad, I knew that every time you put on a particular uniform, somebody had died. And so I knew I had to think about death. And all of my kids are in that sort of category. They've gone, death's a reality. And it can happen because, the deaths I dealt with in the army, probably about half of them were combat deaths, but there were 2 suicides, a couple of motorbike accidents. Randomly, when I was in 2nd 14th Light Horse, we had a guy die of a brain hemorrhage outfield. Really fit fella, only in his 30s, like, boom, dead. And so this was a present reality that they were kind of seeing, and it led to, I think, quite a maturity of outlook on their part. Mm-hmm. And we certainly saw that in Jonathan's life and his death, but also, and I think also military humour kind of penetrated into the family, because as he was dying was when the whole COVID issue was becoming far more problematic in Australia's thinking. Right. And so the nurses, the way the health system worked here, they helped us set up a palliative care ward at home. And nurses were coming every day to just check on meds and all that sort of thing, because there was a charitable nursing service that did that. And his favourite nurse turned up and she was wearing a face mask. And Jonathan, who's, got brain cancer and is dying, he asks her, what's the mask for? And she said, it's in case, without thinking, she said, it's in case you get sick. And she realises, oh no. But Jonathan, he's cacking himself laughing. Just like, oh, that's so funny. And she's like, I want the floor to swallow me whole.
Right.
Jonathan, that's all good. Yeah, this is funny. And I thought, well, military humour has permeated through my entire house. But
yeah, I mean, a little bit of that dark humor, I think, helps to get you through those difficult situations. I know, especially being in the military, when you're dealing with uncertain situations where you don't know, is this going to be a dangerous patrol that you're going on or whatever. You crack some light-hearted jokes, and it puts everyone at ease a little bit more. And so I think that was probably, you may not have even realized it at the time, but that's probably a great gift that you could have given to your son at that time, because it allowed him to see the humor in that situation instead of, maybe panicking and, breaking down and whatever. So, actually probably a very, very good thing, to have.
Black humor is probably one of the best mental health maintainers I know of. You know, before I did a ramp ceremony in Afghanistan, and chaplain, you've got your hat off for that, and so I was, pasty white boy. I was covering myself in sunscreen, and this soldier from my regiment came up to me and he put on this quite camp persona and said, and he basically became my makeup artist. And I was like cacking myself laughing as this guy, oh no, that's not really going to do what we need to do. Like, oh, for Pete's sake, stop it. Stop. I'm going to pee myself. And as we walk out in front of this armoured vehicle, which is the gun carriage and carrying the casket, and we're ready to step off, and I'm slow marching in front of this thing. And I knew the crew of this vehicle really, really well. And the crew commander leans out of the hatch and went, "Hey, Padre." Yeah. I'm like, "Yeah, what? How much will you pay me not to run you over?" I'm like, I turned around, I'm going to get you.
Right.
Seriously. But it was one of those moments like, I feel human again. I actually felt human instead of having to go through machine-like a really pretty awful process as we're farewelling a dead soldier. Just these little bit, and the guy who had died himself, I didn't know him. He was from a different unit, but apparently would have loved it. So, yeah, dark humor is a great force multiplier. So, Echoes in the Wind is the first in a series of 4 novels, and it takes people from looking at a basic training centre to looking at war, to looking at kind of bog ordinary regimental life, to looking at life after the military. So that's the progression of over 4 novels that I'm following. I've nearly finished the second one. It was because it was written concurrently with me struggling with mental health and with Jonathan's illness and death. It's really not been an easy time. It's been very hard to kind of beat through. It's kind of feel like I've been forging a sword, like continually.
Completely understandable too. That, all of that would be a much more difficult process.
Yeah, it affects all sorts of things. One of my editors went, "I think I detect a couple of primal screams of rage in here," which is fine. It's fine, but you maybe need to kind of think about how this particular part of the narrative comes from. Okay, yep. So it needed a lot of work, but the thing I found really good though is, as I've written it, I've gone, wow, this is something. It's helped me to really process my own experience in a fairly fine, detailed way, and the mental health effect for good that I've seen has been quite strong, in that I've kind of like just got far more insight, and I've processed far more of all the stuff that I just had to chuck in the corner and leave because I just didn't have the capability to deal with it at the time.
Right.
Because I was too busy. Yes, you just run over by life, and
that's a good way to put it.
I've had a few Americans who've read Echoes in the Wind, which is the first novel, and I thought, the Australian Army is kind of it'll have a British feel to most people, but it is different. But my main point of view character isn't actually Australian by birth. There's lots of reasons for that, and so on. But probably the main difference that the average American would notice, and I had an American chaplain come up to me in Afghanistan. He was white with fright. What's up? He's like, "Your guys swear so much." I went, listen to them. What they're doing is they're using the F-bomb as vocalized punctuation.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, okay. He was just in shock at the language of my soldiers. And he went away and came back. He said, you're right. They're not actually trying to be in any way obscene. They're just filling in stuff. And yeah, that's exactly what it is. So that was, Americans do notice that about the Australian Army, is it's pretty fruity in its language.
Well, I think one of the things that's kind of funny there is, so having served in the American Army, I know that the language is pretty much, probably on par to what you're talking about there. But we do try to tone it down around the chaplains. we try to, keep that, a little bit, more to a minimum, around them. So, so they're probably
they don't do that with us.
They're probably not as used to hearing that type of language from the other soldiers. So,
yeah, that's probably the case. But yeah, around us, it's kind of like, it's almost a test. Like, chaplain's coming, right? What can we do to wind him up, or do something to try and upset them, or otherwise mess with their head? And if you pass that test, they're it's all good, it's
yeah.
But
that's funny.
Yeah, a lot of the time it was more sort of, I think the craft of chaplaincy is quite different in the Australian Army, because you're just dealing with all comers, and you have to be very respectful and careful. So a preachy kind of overbearing chaplain would not get very far.
Yeah, understood. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but I don't think they get very far anywhere. But yeah.
Well, no, that could be true as well. Yeah. So you talked about how in writing your book, you were writing it as a way to give people a window into your world and kind of break down that divide between civilian and military. How do you think that's worked out? Did you find that some of your, maybe your pre-Army friends and colleagues have come to a better understanding of who you are today, or have you seen any sort of difference in that?
Yeah, I have. It even freaked out my wife a bit. Now, she comes from a British military family that was military, possibly going back to the 1750s.
Okay.
So there's long-term involvement with the British Army. She never served herself, but even she was like, shit, this is really what a day in the life is like. Is this how people speak to each other? Is this how people are like, yeah, this is, I toned the language down a bit, but not much, simply so people could actually get what people say, and it would actually ring true. And she was just astounded on one level, but it's also given her I think it's done two things. One, it started a conversation with the people who I know who haven't served. Two, it's given them an idea, particularly Echoes in the Wind, because it's set at a basic training centre. It gives people an idea of why people are taught to do the things they do, and also an understanding of why Army people don't mince about and hesitate when there's a threat, or take action.
Right.
And that's sometimes a shock. I learned that, a lot of civilian people are shocked by somebody going, bang, okay, we need to do this.
Yep.
And go out with the General Mattis knife hands and just kind of tell people how it's going to be. They're like, exactly. And we're like, isn't this obviously what needs to happen?
Yeah, and that was even that was
Yeah.
even a shock here to a lot of civilians. Back a few years ago, there was the Boston Marathon bombing that took place, and there were a number of soldiers who were participating in the marathon. And while after the bombs went off, all the civilians were running away from the bombs, but the soldiers were
Yep.
running towards it, and they were going. They knew there were people there who needed help. They had medical training, combat, medical training to stop the bleeding at least, and try to help as many people as they can. And they just went and did it. They
Yep.
didn't stop and think, geez, there could be other bombs here. It's like, no, there's people here. They need help, and let's go give them the help that they need. And so, you're right. They're very decisive, and they're just going to go and do the job that they need to do.
Yeah. And I think people in reading the books have gone, have certainly been able to get an appreciation of the forces that influence a military person's personality, and even the quiet ones, probably especially the quiet ones, who are quiet, and then all of a sudden they do something. They're like, "Whoa, where did that come from?"
Right.
They're like, okay, so it's because they need to have a capacity for instantaneous action, not hesitation. There's no time for just sort of stroking your beard and going, "Oh, I wonder whether I should do this or not." It's like if there's an urgent threat, they'll respond straight away. I got some interesting reactions to the main female character, because I have a very strong female character in the book, which intrigued me because a lot of women did not like her. They were very threatened by her.
Interesting.
Whereas I was, that was not what I was expecting.
Yeah.
Whereas I was just kind of like, this is the kind of a normal, competent army officer who just doesn't take crap.
Mm-hmm.
But people were really sort of like, "Oh wow, she's so over the top." I went, no, I can show you over the top, but that's not her. So yeah, so I think it's been broadly successful in that, but for some people, it's hard for them to get past the reality that a military exists to kill people and destroy their stuff, and if you can't get past that mental block, then comprehension is not going to be there.
Right.
And so that was, I think, probably the people who've read it and gone, other ones who are in that line, I just can't get past this. So one of the most I didn't find it confronting, I suppose, but I was having a discussion with somebody who really was quite curious about the military. She really wanted to know, and she's like, "What sort of pressures does a combat soldier live under?" And I went, "Okay, this is not going to be nice." Okay, I'm just like, right up, this will not be a nice story. And she went, "Yeah, okay." I spoke to a soldier I know in Afghanistan. He was a sniper, shot a 12-year-old boy through the neck in order to prevent him detonating the suicide vest that he was wearing.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, "Oh, why did he shoot him through the neck?" Well, to stop the percussion of the bullet strike detonating the vest. Though he was too close to non-combatants. And if he'd been standing in the middle of a group of Taliban, he probably would have gone for the vest. Just to take out more than one. But he shot a child. Yeah, but he saved the lives of 50 to 100 people with one shot.
Yep.
And I think then she began to comprehend that, the decisions that military people have to make are not a nice, or it's not sort of, there's no nice option.
No.
I won't say there's no good option, but there's no nice option.
There are better options, not necessarily that it's a good option. Shooting a child is never a good thing, but there are better options, than allowing the 50 to 100 people to get killed.
Yeah. So he actually he's an interesting guy to talk to. He had a decision-making axis that he drew. He had good, bad, right, wrong on the axis.
Mm-hmm.
And he said sometimes doing the right thing means that I'll do something that is bad in order to preserve what good is there. And that's how he kind of framed that particular incident. And that sort of thing, which intrudes into the first novel, that kind of level of decision making. Once the civilian person is able to comprehend that this is a necessary element of decision making that soldiers have to face, it's not they're only facing that because they're intellectually lazy, or no, they're not really thinking things through. No, it's just a reality. Then they can see. And what happens then is, I've noticed when people do get that, they start to actually look at the world very differently. Mm-hmm. And go, you know what, we live in this country where we're very sheltered, and we can have our gummy bears and unicorns worldview and it doesn't get destroyed. But as soon as that gummy bears and unicorns worldview meets the harsh reality of the world, it just evaporates. And that's a decision point, I think, for people, is once they come to that realization, is, are they just going to pull the doona or the blanket up over their head and try and pretend it's not real? Or are they going to go, well, you know what, this is something I need to actually think about, because, as the illness of my son showed, it's not just combat that kills people.
Right.
Disease. It's not those sorts of things that will be the sole influencer of your mental health. And
a lot of people go through life thinking that these bad things, they just happen to somebody else. That's somebody else's thing. They don't live in the reality that something bad could happen to their children, or that a car, it could be a car accident, or it could be an illness. The case was with your family. Like, bad things do happen, and if you're not mentally prepared for it, which I think a lot of us are guilty of, that is just not being prepared for that. It's going to come back and bite you, and it's going to bite hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd occasionally get people, when Jonathan was ill, who would either say that you need to follow this particular prayer program, or you need to follow this particular diet or treatment program. And they'd say, medical, big pharmacy is got an interest in keeping people sick. And I went, okay, well, big health food companies have also got an interest in making people paranoid about big pharmacy. So I see profit intruding from both directions here, people.
Sure.
Like, you can't escape death. As one American preacher I heard years ago put it, he said, guess what? If you get a miraculous healing, you get to grow old, get sick, and die like the rest of us. I was like, massive belly laughs. I went, wow, reality, this is good. But a lot of people, both inside and outside any church or faith or whatever sort of circles, kind of have this if only you change X, Y, and Z, then you wouldn't get these diseases. Oh, because I asked when Jonathan had his tumour biopsied, they sent part of it to Germany because there's medical researchers over there who are trying to map the genetics of these things because they don't know anything about it. And my oldest sister's a medical specialist, and I asked her what causes it. And my wife was worried, it was the headphones or something that he used to wear. And she went, no, it's not them. Wireless headphones, in fact, have less electromagnetic than hardwired ones. But even so, it's not sufficient. It's not the causative thing for this kind of brain tumour. We just don't know. And for a lot of people accepting, I don't know that, it's out of my control, that's like, boom, massive moment.
Yeah, no, it is. Absolutely. My wife, a couple of years ago, she had unexpectedly just started having seizures, and she'd never had them before in her life. And after a 2-week stay in the hospital, of which a good portion of it, she was in a medically induced coma, the doctors had no real answer for what caused it and why it happened. No, preventative actions. It's just, just go back and go about your life the way you always had, because there's nothing that you can change really to prevent this from happening in the future. Something happened, obviously, but they don't know what.
Yep.
And that's exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Neurological stuff is just so complex. Mm-hmm. We were fortunate in that the palliative care doctor the head palliative care doctor at the hospital that was overseeing Jonathan's treatment was somebody we had known from university. And he's just like, no, we got nothing. We don't know. We don't know how this happens. We don't know how it will progress. We can say what's typical because it's such an unusual cancer. They don't really have a lot to go on. I guess I came back to military training, really, which is to say, and also my worldview is that I live in a world that I don't control, and sweating about the stuff that I don't control is going to screw my head real quick. Right. And so therefore what I need to do is that, what can I do? I can love my family. I can cook dinner. I can make the beds. I can give people a cuddle, when they're sad over this whole sort of circumstance. And similarly in a war zone, one of the most entertaining aspects of being in Afghanistan was a flight on a 101st Airborne Black Hawk. Simply because it just I felt like we needed Creedence Clearwater Revival cranking while going out that there.
Feeling, yep.
The Australian Army is very particular about its helicopters, and so they maintain all the noise-proof lining, all that sort of thing, whereas these things were just, they had all the noise-proof lining removed, they had the side windows perspex removed. This was a flying truck, and we took off, and they weren't flying very high and going really quick. And after the initial, holy crap, it was like, hey, this is kind of cool. And then I realised, this is, I'm in a war zone. I'm in a helicopter that will probably be shot at as we go up this particular valley. I can't control anything about this, so I might as well just enjoy this moment now, rather than the ride. Yeah. It got a little bit exciting as there was one combat outpost we came into that it was rocketed or had something done to it every day. And the Aussie infantry who were there were maniacs in that they'd laugh when an RPG hit the HESCO. They just or play a game called Rocket O'Clock, where you divide the patrol base or something into grid squares, and if the rocket hits your grid square, you collect the cash.
So that's a fun way to do it.
Yeah, they
talk about dark
games.
humor.
Yeah, that was apparently quite popular in Kandahar. I learned, but it was done elsewhere where there was a lot of rockets. And as we were coming in, the Black Hawk's sensors must have picked up something it didn't like, because flares started going, and I could see the guys on the door guns getting excited.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up not firing anything. And it's like, yeah, well, here I am in the middle of an incredibly unpredictable country, and that ability to just not sweat things you can't control is going to save your sanity. Whereas there was an Australian politician who I won't name, who I hosted somewhat toward the end of my stay in Afghanistan. And he never left the multinational base at Tarin Kot. But the whole time he was sweating bullets, expecting some 107 rocket to come screaming over and land on his head. And I'm like, you can't control that, sir.
Right.
You just have to accept the fact that this is a place where you don't control much.
Yeah, if it's your time, it's your time. That's, I mean, kind of the conclusion you have to come to at that.
Yeah. It's often a problem in basic training, I think, that I noted, as I was posted to basic training centres twice, that the big mental adjustment for a lot of people is getting used to a world where they're told what to do and they don't control what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And not all of them make that adjustment. And we'd work pretty hard to get rid of them and make it easy for them to leave, because the military life isn't for everyone. But it was interesting once they started to just look at the world a bit differently. That made it a lot easier for them. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to switch gears just a little bit. I follow you on Instagram, and I've seen several posts of yours where you talk about archery and shooting archery. I practiced archery when I was younger, and I found that when I was doing it, it had almost like a relaxing quality to it. How has that helped you along the way in your journey, or has that been a conscious component?
Very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I was a rifle shooter and hunter for many years, a lot of my life, from when I was relatively young. But I found with the PTSD that I wasn't enjoying rifle shooting as much. Just didn't like it, the noise. It was annoying.
Mm-hmm.
And it'd take me 10 minutes before I could get the jumps and jitters out of the system. And I ended up selling all my firearms and getting 3 bows instead, because archery has all of the same things that I loved about rifle shooting. It forces you to clear your mind, and there's a lot of precision to it. But there's also some extra elements that rifle shooting doesn't have. It's got a very mindful, almost Tai Chi-like movement to it. And if I'm having problems with an anxiety spike, or if I've got writer's block, if I go out and shoot the bow for half an hour or an hour, it usually just goes, because it requires so much concentration that I can't stew in my own juices. I can't allow the anxiety to just keep winding up. And it gives you something to kind of, it's a grounding exercise, really.
Right.
So I've found it a huge benefit, really. And an old injury from army caused me to not be able to shoot the bow for like 60 days. That was like, yeah, I was like,
yeah. So I can see that. and I see that in your post too, the way you talk about it, and how, from my experience, how focused you have to be on that activity in order to do it and do it well, and all the components that go into drawing
Yeah,
the bow
it's
back, and the aim, and even down to your breathing and things like that
yes,
that go into it, and then the release and the follow through to let the arrow fly, all of that. If you're focusing on it and not just doing it in a mechanical format and just shooting just to shoot, which I can see with rifle or pistol shooting, doing that where you can just pull the
yeah,
trigger and it's going to do the work for you. You could very easily get into that habit of just shooting just for the sake of shooting, but if you're doing it for the grounding purpose, like you were talking about, to just center your attention on that, and let that, the anxiety or the whatever you had going on in your mind, whether writer's block or anything else,
yeah, yeah,
that stuff, I could see how it just would fade away with that intense focus that you have,
yeah.
with
Particularly
archery.
with writing some parts of the second novel, which is called A Wind of Bitter Tears. I had to revisit some things that I really had been hiding from. And I'd write a passage, I'd be writing for about an hour and I'd be cooked. So I'd go outside with the bow, and yeah, I'd often, like, the first 10, 20 shots were just horrendous. And then soon just kind of the regularity, the rhythm of the thing started to get rid of that.
Right.
And then by the time I'd shot the last 30 or so in, say, a string of 100, everything was singing. It was going really well. But yeah, it could really depends on on what the cause is. But yeah, I think after Jonathan died, I shot the bow for like 3 hours solid. Once everything was taken care of, I knew my family was safe and we were around each other. I just said to my wife, I'm going to go down to where I shoot the bow. Anybody can join me and what have you, but I'm just going to shoot until my fingers drop off. And yeah, that was a good afternoon, because Jonathan's one of my other sons was often mistaken for, he and Jonathan were often mistaken for twins. They were very close, and it really ripped him what happened. And there was a lot of spite went into that shooting, but there wasn't a lot of accuracy. It was pretty ragged. Yeah, it was a pretty ragged afternoon, but it was certainly very helpful. But yeah, what a 2020, what a year.
Yeah, it was a bad year for quite a few people around the world, but I can't imagine adding the loss that your family has had on top of that, and that was at the start of it all too, so it's not like it really got much better for you after that.
No, it was grim for a bit, but again, I'm very thankful for a lot of things. One, for Jonathan's own robustness and faith and hope and laughter and everything else that came with him. But also, just I look back to my upbringing with, my father was born pre-antibiotics, and when things like polio pandemics would kill people on a scale that COVID has not managed, when life was very uncertain. And I think I learned a lot of lessons from him, Korean War veteran, that permeated the rest of my life in ways that I wasn't aware of until I was older, like those mental reflexes that you have from your deep past is they certainly come to the fore under stress, and they did, and I was very thankful for that. A realistic upbringing, not a if you do everything right, your life will be nice. No.
Not a fairy tale upbringing,
No.
grounded, realistic. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So.
Dad often used to say, "No good deed goes unpunished." He was pretty cynical. So
yeah,
that was.
I've heard that one too. Yeah.
Yeah. A few people are saying, "You're so cynical." Like, no, just realistic. I had to I've had to help my own children at times with their just expectation that everything will turn to crap at a moment's notice. Which on the one hand is true. It can happen.
It can.
But we they had to learn earlier than I would have wished, probably, to balance that with a different sort of outlook. And when my youngest, she's a 10-year-old, she fell over at school and broke her arm, and when she was at the doctor, she said, "Oh, well, hope for the best, prepare for the worst." And the doctor's like, "Is your father in the military?" And she went, "Yes." I could tell.
Yep.
It's just this expectation. Okay, I'm going to plan for things going well. I'm going to work towards things going well, but I'm also going to be ready when things go flying into the fan.
Yeah, and I think some people will see that attitude as like maybe not the best attitude to have. Like, why are you thinking of things going bad? But at the same time, if you're prepared for it, you're going to make the best of that bad situation. So I think that's a healthy attitude to have, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, certainly. I think, and this is what I think military service, how it creates this bond across different cultures, because we the ground note beneath everything that we do is chaos. We are trained to face a chaotic and unpredictable set of circumstances. We're trained to inflict chaos, but also to receive it, respond to it, and counterattack it. And that requires a particular set of mental pre-commitments. And if you haven't made them, and I'd sometimes look at young soldiers in basic training with concern, it's like, oh, you still really haven't got how nasty this can be. Mm-hmm. I will keep an eye on you. Probably the ones that I saw who combat engineers and the EOD work they did. Yeah, those guys fighting a war on the cusp of sudden obliteration, with finding bombs, diffusing bombs, and working in closely with, particularly in Uruzgan province, we had a lot of American EOD teams, because they had some really neat flyaway gear, bots and so forth. I just watched them get together as a group of people, and you're like, I remember somebody saying to me, but they're developing a fairly, skewed view of life. And really, are they? They know once they, step back into civilian life in Australia, that the threat matrix changes
significantly.
Yeah, but and with the way terrorism has just sort of, I think, intruded into every country's thinking. I think people are, some people are starting to wake up to, and with COVID, waking up to, this is not as comfortable and nice as I thought it was going to be.
Right.
Whereas the average veterans are like, oh, okay, so
life hasn't changed all that much.
Yeah, that's right. The Australian government was, in the week that Jonathan died, it went from you could have 100 people at a funeral, to you have 40 people at a funeral, to have 10 people at a funeral.
Wow.
Which meant I had to take his funeral, which sucked. But at the very beginning of that week, I watched the way things were going. I went, if I apply the military, the army matrix of continually shifting goalposts and chaos to this, I need to be prepared to take the funeral if that needs to happen. And so I did up an order of service, readings and prayers and I couldn't manage a sermon. Just couldn't do that. But things that represented his life. And I did that up, saved it on my computer, and just got ready for what was coming next. And so when it did come down to me having to take his funeral, it was like, oh, okay, print this out, laminate it. I was ready. And whereas a lot of people are like, oh, everything's changing, the goalposts are shifting. And I went, that was my career, Yeah. You get told to muster at 6 a.m. and pretty sure everybody's going to be there at 3 and not knowing why.
So that's the same in the Australian military as well. That happens here too.
Mission creep is. Yep. I was fortunate in that most of the time I was in regimental headquarters, so I knew what time you really had to be there. And I'd seen conversations between the regimental sergeant majors going spare at somebody like, why did you tell her to be here so early? It's like ranting. Yep. So
exactly. Well, Roger, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today, and learning about your journey, your time overseas, and everything that you've gone through, since returning back. It's really been eye-opening, and I think the listeners here are gonna really appreciate your openness and willingness to share your side of the story, and also to understand a little bit more about the kind of universal nature of this mental health battle that we all face. I'd like to just give you a minute here to let people know where they can go to find your books, and to follow you, to find out more about your journey and everything that you're up to.
Yep. So you can find my books in the usual online sellers. I am in consultation with a tech-savvy son developing the facility to sell them from my site. But for Americans, it's available through Amazon.com and others, details of which is on my website. So I'm Roger Marsh, author in the Instagram world. And if you go to my profile page, there's a link to my website, porthanun.com, and the links are there for where you can get it.
Perfect.
Second novel's coming out soon, which will be it's called A Wind of Bitter Tears. First one's Echoes in the Wind. And it will be followed by 2 more, which is The Devil in the Downdraft and Angel of Wrath, which is the last in that series. So there's a series of 4 that explores life as a window into the military world. So you can kind of pick something up, and even though if you're an American reader, it's different to the US military, the customs, the language is different. There's an awful lot that's the same. The process of change on to go.
Yeah. From what you've mentioned, it seems like there's an awful lot that is the same, and I'm sure there's some cultural and language differences that are in there, but that's, I think the core essence of what you're trying to get at is the military culture, and I think that largely is going to be very similar. Whether it's an American or Australian audience that's reading the book. So
even the German guy I've interacted with has said, like, there is so much that's similar.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I will have links to all of this, your social media and your website and the Amazon link. So anyone who's looking to get the book and find out a little bit more about life in the Australian military, please go pick that book up. And if you do, leave a review on the book. That certainly does help.
Always helpful.
Definitely helps authors out with the way the algorithms rank the books in the whole scheme of things.
Of a black art.
It is, yeah. It's a bit. It is a kind of a. There's a black box there, and you don't know exactly what happens when all that input goes in there. But I do know that reviews do help. So if you do pick up the book, definitely leave a review. And again, Roger, it's been wonderful speaking with you. I'm really appreciated the conversation. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks very much, Scott. It's been great to have a yarn to you about our shared experience and the other wildness and weirdness of military life.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks again.
No worries. Catch you later.
Thanks for listening to the Drive On Podcast. If you want to check out more episodes or learn more about the show, you can visit our website, driveonpodcast.com. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube at Drive On Podcast.